The major system for rapidly memorizing numbers is not called major because most mnemonists use it, although they do. No, this popular and very unique mnemonic system was given the name major because history has tended to attribute it to a person named Major Beniowski. And you know what? I personally find it majorly exciting to use because regardless of the name, the major system helped me when I was studying for my PhD at York University. It has helped me learn vocabulary from many languages, and it even helped me hold my own in a memory competition against a 2-times Guinness record holder for memorizing playing cards. And the system that he used to do that and that I used to do that are basically premised on the major or something very close to it. So in this video, I'm going to share exactly how to use this mnemonic system yourself for memorizing any number, and I'll take you a step further by showing you how the major can be used to memorize numbers that may involve symbols or letters, as in mathematical formulas. And I'll give you some examples with the language learning applications and show you how, ultimately, to use the major system when you're studying within a memory palace. So you ready to get started? Not so quick. Since you're going to learn a formula that you'll remember faster by writing, please get out a pencil or a pen and then let's dive in and learn what is the major system and how you can use it. This is Dr. Anthony Metivier from magneticmemorymethod.com. If you're new here, get subscribed and hit that thumbs up for the love of memory so that the robots always remember that we humans care about our natural memory and the ancient techniques that our ancestors cooked up long ago. And the major system is indeed very, very old. People have used it for centuries to help them remember numbers. And you know, it's much more powerful than number rhymes. So if you don't know number rhymes, it's like 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a bee, etc. And that can be useful, especially for kids. Like if you want to learn the times table, 2 times 2 is 4. So you have 2 pairs of shoes by the door and that sort of thing in a memory palace. So you can use number rhymes in combination with locations in memory palaces. But the major is a way of making things a little bit faster. People have used it for everything from phone numbers to thousands of digits of pi. And you might be thinking, man, you're joking. Thousands of digits of pi with this kind of stuff? Well, Akira Haraguchi has done just that. And here's an important point about this. He used the Japanese version of the major system. And the reason why I mention this is because it doesn't matter what your core language is. I'm going to teach you the most common configuration of the major in English, but it is in other languages, other configurations. And also you might like to know historically that it is part of the core of, say, Tony Buzin's SEM3 technique. And many earlier memory competitors, after he shared this, used it to win year after year. And the major is really still at the core of newer memory techniques like the shadow, which competitors like Alex Mullen, Braden Adams, etc. have used to stunning effect. Now, when we think about it in terms of how it's normally used in English, the way it works is that you start by converting the digits 0 to 9 into consonant sounds. So this is basically a form of chunking sounds together with numbers. And the most common pairs that people use are 0, which is soft C, S, or Z. And, you know, to help yourself remember this, I'll give you a couple of examples, but write this down, like get the biggest pencil you can and write it down so that you learn it a little bit faster, because writing is one of the ultimate ways of starting the remembering process. So soft C, S, or Z. And like a simple way to remember this is that S sounds a little bit like 0, and so does Z, very literally is in 0. Cookie Monster reaching through a sleeping snake that's snoring, that sort of thing, to dip a cookie in some milk. The cookie gets soft, so soft C. Those are the kinds of images that I use to remember it lickety-split. 1 is a T or D, and you can notice that 1 is kind of reflected in T or D because both those letters have 1 downstroke. 2 is N. It has 2 downstrokes. Noah took the animals onto the ark in pairs. 3 has 3 downstrokes, so it's associated with M. Mustaches on their side can look like M's as well. 4 is R. You can think about how 4 has 4 letters, F-O-U-R, and it ends in R. 5 is L. If you hold one of your hands like this, then you'll see an L right in front of you with this sort of shape, which is also a cool way that you can remember. I think it's in Python. You can clear the screen with Command L, and you can imagine this little windshield wiper here cleaning away the code or whatever you're working on the screen in that particular program. 6 is a j, sh, ch, or soft G sound. And, J is not that dissimilar from 6 if you think about it visually. 7, usually a hard G and a K. And you could use Q as well. I think if you want, you could put Y in there. And, visually 7 can look a little bit like a K. 8 is F or V, and 9 is P or B. And there's different ways that, I don't have to feed you all these possible ideas. You can think about for yourself what these numbers may represent when you think about them with this consonant pattern. The thing is you got to learn the consonant pattern at some point. I did it mnemonically, but if you have to learn it by rote, learn it by rote. It's like one of the few times I will say, just learn this thing by rote. Okay, so to quickly review this and give myself the memory exercise of it, 0 is soft C, S, or Z, 1 is D or T, 2 is N, 3 is M, 4 is R, 5 is L, 6 is sh, j, j, 8 is ch also, 7 is k or hard G. I never use the hard G actually. 8 is F or V, 9 is B or P. So that gives you the whole range. Now, you want to note here that the vowels are left out, right? A, E, I, O, U are just not in the system. And that's because we want to use them in between the consonants to make words. And that's very, very important. Now, some people have said, well, I'm going to use vowels anyway, and you can make any arrangement that you want. I believe that probably the reason why that the major is consonant heavy throughout history is precisely because that gives you the maximum array of words, but also there's something, I think, a little bit more in terms of onomatopoeia maybe, memorable about words that are front and end loaded with consonants. I don't really know if that's the case, but it's just pure speculation. But Simon Louisi, he has shared a variation where he has 3 paired with W in addition to M, and sometimes we think of W as a consonant, and he has 7 with Y, and 7 kind of looks like a Y, and that apparently is especially useful for native French speakers to help expand the number of words. So there's many different variations in different languages. It's really not about English. Remember, this stuff is pre-English. English didn't even exist when these techniques came out. And, Hugh of St. Victor, he had a very early version of these systems, and he's doing it in Latin, So, and Aristotle talks about this stuff. So it doesn't really have anything to do with English. It just has to do with having consonant sounds linked to numbers. And then you put vowels in between those consonants to turn them into memorable words. So here's a very, very simple example. If you want to remember the number 1, 2, 3, you could break it down like this. 1 is going to be a T or a D, 2 is going to be an N, 3 is going to be an M. And from this arrangement, you might form a word like DNM, denim. If you had to memorize a number like 22, you could imagine a nun. And here you have 2 and 2, so N and N, and then the vowel is going to be U, nun. It's really the only one that I can think of, actually, the only word that really makes sense there. Although you could have none as in nothing, and that would be interesting, but harder to visualize. So part of the idea here is that you make a word that you can actually see in your mind. And when I see a nun in my mind, I think very much of the time Mr. Bean dressed as a nun, or maybe it was just Rowan Atkinson dressed as a nun. Anyway, there's a picture of Rowan Atkinson dressed as a nun, the actor who played Mr. Bean, and that's what I use pretty much any time I see 22. But what if you had 22235? Well, then you could imagine a nun attacking an animal, like a tiger or animal from the Muppets, right? Because 235 has NML, animal, right? So now 22235, it's just really, really great how that all works, right? Now there's a more advanced version that works even faster for this, and it's called the 00 to 99 PAO system, which we're not going to talk about today, but I've been using that ever since that I competed against Dave Farrow in the memory competition that I mentioned. And he was faster, and he said, why I was faster than you. And then part of that inspired me to not just develop the major into a 00 to 99 PAO, but just generally focus on numbers more. And it led me to insights that I would never have had otherwise. So this is like one of the arguments for going to competitions. You'll meet people who are way better than you at these techniques. And if they see that you can actually give them a run for their money, or keep up with them at least, then they're going to give you ideas that you just won't get any other way, I don't think. At least that's been my experience. Anyway, if you want to hear Dave Farrow and I talk about that whole experience, it's on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. And he was so kind and generous to me, but I don't think that he would have been if that I hadn't been able to hold my own in that competition. And man, was it ever fun. Okay, before we get into using the major for memory palaces and so forth, I want to go a little bit deeper into the history. As you know, I really believe that the history of these techniques is important. I'm not a trained historian, so, take it for what it's worth, but these are some things that I have dug up from the history, and I think that we just have to do historical work. So if you agree, thumbs up, let me know in the comments. These are ancient memory techniques, and even if we have to kind of reconstruct things and guess and speculate about what they might have been like in the ancient times, that's important that we keep passing that forward and that we participate in the evolution of these techniques with history in mind, if only to honor Nemesis, the goddess of memory, and to honor our ancestors. I mean, maybe that's going a bit too far, but the more I study these ancient traditions and other philosophical traditions, the more important it seems to me that we hold history in mind. Okay, so the major system, it's often attributed to the Greek and the Romans, who did indeed use number systems in combination with the method of loci. But the major system is much older than that. I mean, the earliest version that I found is called the Katapeyadi, and you can find this in the ancient Hebrew version. If you read Aaron Katz's Where Did Noah Park the Ark, you get some of that history. In the so-called West, it really starts to take shape in the 16th and 17th centuries through people like Giordano Bruno and Robert Flood, and they're using letters and consonants and also shapes sometimes to represent numbers. But their systems were, quite frankly, as much as I love Bruno and Flood, they were pretty inconsistent in how they described it, and they lacked a standardized approach. So the people who started to give it much more regularity, they include Johann Justus Winkelmann. And so Winkelmann, he was a German mathematician and a mnemonist, and he proposed a method where you're going to have each digit always associated with the same specific consonants. And this lays the groundwork for later developments. I don't know if he knew the Katapeyadi or not, but he starts to, quite insist on this being the way. Aimé Paris, he is a French mathematician, he's a memory expert, and he simplified the associations much more than Winkelmann, and he makes it a little more user-friendly, and his version is pretty much identical to the major system as we know it today. Then we get Major Beniowski, and wow, I don't know exactly why that his name gets associated with it, but he's a 19th century linguist, I believe. He's a memory expert, and he's the author of the most strangely titled memory book that I've ever heard, The Anti-Absurd or Phenotypic English Pronunciation and Orthographical Dictionary. Is that right? Or is it Pronunciating an Orthographical Dictionary? Some weird title like this. Anyway, not much known is about Major Beniowski, but I think that Beniowski refers to his military rank. He was a major in the military. Anyway, the name clearly underscores his major role in popularizing and standardizing what is really the major mnemonic method for memorizing numbers. And through Beniowski's teachings and writings, he helped spread the use of this system and made it accessible to a wider audience, even with the crazy title of this book. Anyway, the technique gets refined even further with people like Harry Lorraine. He brings it to the masses. I mean, he brings it to the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And then you have books later like Moonwalking with Einstein that encourage many people to incorporate this system into their learning lives. And it's really, really wild how that it just comes into this new renaissance of the memory techniques. But it's been around for an astonishing amount of time, and it continues to evolve. So there's a variation now called the shadow. And, the shadow is itself undergoing transformations as I record this video. And you might be wondering what that's all about. I never am quite sure that I totally understand it. But part of the idea is that in memorizing playing cards, to get faster and faster, you want to be able to memorize more than one card at a time. So if you have a Jack of Spades and a Two of Clubs, you want one image for that, but you also want an image for the Two of Clubs and the Jack of Spades. They mastered that, and a lot of it has to do with the work of Lance Chart, I think you pronounce his name. Well, that wasn't enough, right? And also, they want to use software for displaying the cards, which would mean multiple decks of cards. So you would sometimes have 2 Jack of Spades in a row, maybe 3 Jack of Spades in a row, maybe 4 Jack of Spades in a row. So what if you could have an image for when you have 2 Jack of Spades in a row, 3 Jack of Spades in a row, etc.? Or what if you have 3 Jack of Spades and a Queen of Hearts? So the shadow has gotten into helping encompass that, and also being able to have less images in a way, because imagine if you have Jack of Spades and Two of Clubs, or Two of Clubs and Jack of Spades, but you just want one image for that. And you have, I don't know, let's say you have ketchup for Jack of Spades and Two of Clubs. If you see Two of Clubs and Jack of Spades, well, then you just use mustard, because that's the opposite, or the shadow. Anyway, again, I don't know that I fully understand it. And there's something about memory palaces where if 2 red cards in a row show up, then you would have it in a particular part of a memory palace, and then you would only move to the next part of your memory palace when you get a black card, and so forth. It's all super detailed. I'm never going to do it because I'm never going to compete in cards again, I don't think. But it's really fascinating to try to work out what it is. My point in sharing it, my vague understanding of it, is just simply that the major appears in most systems to still be at the core of how you develop the words that are associated. So mustard and ketchup, those words would be coming not just randomly out of nowhere, but because the major underlies the numbers that are associated with the cards at the very, very core. So in a way, this kind of relates to what Giordano Bruno was doing, and it has its own standardization and regulation, because Bruno was talking about shadows a lot as well. Okay, so if you want to check out some of the most impressive uses of the major Lance Chart, K.D. Kermode and Don Michael Vickers, these people are just going crazy with this, and they are seriously impressive. All right, now let's talk about how to use the major system in a memory palace. There's so much to be said about creating and using memory palaces, and as you know, I've covered all of that before. But in brief, this is a memory technique that involves setting up a mental construct based on real locations, at least one real location. But as you know, I encourage you to have multiple locations, at least one memory palace based on your house, one based on a school, one based on a church or a favorite movie theater, a restaurant, etc. The important thing is that you create a mental journey through your memory palaces that's clear and crisp, so you don't have to think about this journey. And once you're set up, you convert the numbers that you need to memorize into consonants, and then you form words or phrases by adding vowels or other non-consonant sounds. And these words need to be as vivid and memorable as possible as you lay them out in memory palace journeys. And you may need to do some visualization exercises in order to make things as vivid as possible in your memory, all of which is covered in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. There's even a course there called Visualization Mastery. Now, once you've got all this done, you place the words that you come up with in a memory palace. So basically, you're associating each word as a mnemonic image within the location. And you do this as vividly as possible with lots of detailed interactivity. So if you have 3, 1, 4, 3 is an M, 1 is a T or D, 4 is an R. So you can imagine right here in a memory palace, a meter, maybe a meteor. And the memory palace placement is, just a large meter on the wall, or a meteor crashing down, and you hear the sounds of it and all this sort of stuff. And that's going to help you recall that number because of the consonants being linked to the numbers. Another example, maybe over here, we got 7, 2, and so now we got 7, a hard G or a K, 2 is an N. I could have here a gunman like Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't really want him to, be here in this room, but it's pretty memorable if he is, right? And then I just go through those consonants and then it brings back the number. I don't know, maybe you would have this person in your kitchen guarding the fridge. So it doesn't have to be a negative association. It could be a positive one as well. But the idea is you think back to your fridge and you go, aha, there was a gunman there. So that is this set of numbers. So this is it, really, in a nutshell. Now, it's got one more step, which is how are you going to get numbers like that into long-term memory? Because there's a difference between the short-term application and then having yourself be able to recall it months later, years later, or at least weeks later when you're sitting down for a test. To establish long-term retention of numbers is very, very important, especially if you're dealing with historical dates and information that, your brain is going to naturally try and deprecate it. If you don't have it being super important and you're not using it all the time, you really need to do this step because it's going to increase your ability to memorize the information over the long term. Crazy images in memory palaces are great, but you want to revisit them to lock it down for the long haul, and you can revisit in very, very optimal ways. So I would encourage you to learn about spaced repetition. It's really easy, and yet it's hard at the same time. So let's say that you have a nun who is attacking a tiger. Let's say you got 10 of these numbers, and they're distributed all along a memory palace journey. It's easy to just travel the memory palace from beginning to end to decode each image. And it's almost like watching a movie. As you move from here to here, we had a meteor here, right? And it's just amazing how easy it is for you to think back and, that meteor was crashing down, boom, right? And you just decode it. But what makes it a little more challenging is to not just go forward through a memory palace, but to also go backwards. And then once you've gone forward and backwards, to skip each station in the memory palace. And this is going to give you more doses of primacy and recency effect. And you want to try and do this approximately 5 times the first day. Now, where does this idea of 5 come from? It's not a magic number. There are no magic numbers. But basically, Dominic O'Brien had the rule of 5. He created his own mnemonic system that's different than the major, by the way, called the Dominic system. And, it's interesting. It's a little bit more arbitrary than the major, but I have a whole video all about the Dominic system, comparing the Dominic to the major if you want to check that out. But the idea is if you're going to revisit these things, don't revisit them in the same order all the time because you're going to give yourself too much primacy effect. You want to have primacy effect, recency effect, and serial positioning effect. So that's why you go forward and backward and then skip the stations and even start in the middle and go from the middle to the end and the middle to the beginning in a memory palace. This is going to give, quote unquote, equal doses of primacy and recency through serial positioning, which is going to give you greater retention of all the information over the long term. So let's say it's historical dates in an exam. So 5 times the first day, forward and backward, all these patterns. And then the classic rule of 5 from Dominic O'Brien would be once a day for 5 days, once a week for 5 weeks, once a month for 5 months, that sort of thing, right? I'd be a little bit more robust, especially if I have an exam coming up, right? So if you're doing this, you want to give yourself time to study and then give yourself much more time to revisit it mentally. And if you really want the best results, I know it's a big pencil and I'm exaggerating here with this big pencil, but if you have a big pencil, it might help you to remind yourself to follow this pattern. But write everything out from memory. A lot of people just do this purely in the mind, which is cool. You want to do that as well. But active recall studies show that people who bring the information they're trying to recall to memory first, then write it down, they get much better long-term retention. So this is really, really important. And this is why you never want to cram, right? Because, you can cram sometimes and pass exams. But what about when you become a professional and you want to get hired and you want to prove to your bosses that you're the one that should be hired, right? You don't want to be like, I took an exam on that and I passed, but woe is me that I can't remember a dang thing that I studied in school. No, you don't want that. So this is why you want to make sure that you're able to have all of this information for the long term. And then you won't be fishing around for information nearly as much. So if you're serious about being able to recall information, you'll revisit it more than a few times to get it down cold. You'll also write down from memory by calling it to mind, then putting it through your hand. And this is very, very important. And the best part about doing all this is you can turn it into a discipline that you apply throughout your entire life. And nothing is boring anymore. Really, it makes it so exciting. But it is challenging, and it needs to be challenging in order to help form memories. But it also constantly exercises your imagination, your mind, your visualization, your critical thinking, and those things get stronger and stronger. It's so fantastic. So with all that in mind, let's talk about some intermediate and, shall we say, advanced major system techniques where you'll use numbers in ways that actually lead you to other kinds of information and more numbers. So once you have the basics of the major method down, maybe you want to learn how to create a person action object or 00 to 99 PAO system. So that's in a different video, and I highly encourage you to watch that. But the idea there is that you're just going to be a lot faster because when you see 00, you're instantly going to have an image for that. I have two. I have Dr. Thomas Zaz and I have Dr. Zeus. And to make Dr. Zeus even more magnetic for myself, I read his biography, and it's just like, wow, amazing. And I didn't know this, that he actually took a course for a short time. I don't even think he completed it with Tolkien, the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings, right? And he had this whole adventure overseas in Europe, and amazing. So 00, Dr. Zeus. Why? Well, the major says soft C, S, or Z for 0. So two zeros together, we get S and S. Right? Zeus. But you could use the god Zeus as well, or you could use Thomas Zaz. Are there other people? I don't know, but the idea is it's a person. And, well, what about PAO, person, action, object? Well, an object for this, is a little bit hard to figure out, but I'm sure you could think of something if you think about it, and I'll encourage you to think about it. Dr. Zeus, of course, he apparently, I didn't know this, but he liked to get drunk a lot, so he was soused a lot of the time, and people would call him Dr. Souse because he was a drinker. Amazing, right? So there's the action, right? But in any case, that's one thing that you can do with the major, and you can do it from 00 to 99 and beyond, but ultimately you're just going to be able to look at two-digit numbers, and you'll always have an image for every two-digit number array. And this can help you in other areas. Like if you're learning human anatomy and you have to remember stuff about blood flow through the heart or blood pressure, etc. You just look at those numbers, you instantly have images. But the images are based on the major system. You can also think about using a major system to help you memorize any book. So I do this quite a bit in casual learning. Oh, there's a cool fact. I want to remember that. So I'll just look at the page number and I have images based on the major, and bang presto, I'll remember the detail. The page becomes a kind of memory palace. So that's a major use of the major system. And, another thing is, as I mentioned, language learning. And so you can start to get memory palaces together with words that you're memorizing. And it happens to me not that often. I usually just use straight up alphabetical associations when I'm memorizing words, but sometimes I can't think of images immediately for some words. So I just look at the consonants of the words, and the major system tells me what my image would be in the number system. It's not perfect. It doesn't always accurately reflect pronunciation, but it's always at least a starting point. One of the number one things to do is just keep momentum, keep moving, not getting, I can't think of an image, poor me. No, just change the system that you're using. So a very recent example, I was memorizing a Sanskrit phrase, and later I changed the image, came up with a celebrity, and the celebrity was better, but the word has 07 in it in the major system, which my image for that is Oliver Sacks. So I could at least get started with Oliver Sacks for Sukti Karajatam, right? And that led me eventually to think about Sukyin Lee. Sacks is not Suk, right? But Sukyin Lee is. But for whatever reason at that moment, I just couldn't think of Sukyin Lee, so I had Oliver Sacks to get going. And this is a beautiful thing about the major. Again, it's not that great always for pronunciation purposes, but it's close enough usually, right? And then it triggers the other idea. So in my research, this numerical bidirectionality for language learning, it is thousands of years old itself. So you'll see it reflected in Aristotle. You can watch my video on Aristotle's nuclear alphabet for that. And it's in the imaginary memory palace method of Hugh of St. Victor. And I've got a whole video about that as well. Okay, so with those intermediate and advanced uses in place and covered for your mnemonic and magnetic enjoyment, let's talk about practicing this so you can learn it, deeply absorb it, and master it over time. There are a few cool ways to practice the major system that I want to share with you. And you really just have to start, though, with learning the major. So again, it's like the one time I'll say, if you have to do rote learning, rote learn it. But, you can place all of these associations I suggested in a memory palace. Like 5 is L on the 5th station in your memory palace. You just look at yourself in a memory palace going like that. Oh, 5 is L, right? But one thing that you can do is just take number tests frequently. And there are softwares that will just pop up number tests. And, the International Association of Memory has one, which I believe Katie Kermode is the person who helped program that. I mean, maybe not on her own, but I think she's behind that. You can keep a journal of your progress. And when I learned the 00 to 99 PAO, I knew the major, and I would just write out 00, Thomas Zaz, Dr. Zeus, 01, Sad, 02, Sun, 03, Sandwich, and so on. And it just, very shortly, I knew all of my images. Anyway, one person to check out who's very good at keeping a journal for memory purposes is Johannes Malo. I've got an interview all about this with him. He's an incredible memory athlete, and so his journaling ideas may help you learn it even faster. You can also put your numbers on flashcards and test yourself manually. Just get cards, index cards, and you have, 00 written there and 01 all the way up to 100, and you just look at it and you go, oh, there's 97, must be Pac-Man. If you want to get super elaborate, just learning the major from cards is you look at 0 on a card and, oh, that's off C, S, or Z. And if a 7 comes, like hard G and K, that sort of thing. And you just train yourself that way to have a rapid fire response. I would make sure that you actually also write it out by hand. You're just going to memorize it that much faster. So memory palace, writing by hand, getting cards to train so that you see it. And then if you really want to go for gold and have some kind of experience like I had with Dave Farrow, start memorizing playing cards. Now this is kind of elaborate, probably a separate video at some point, and each card has a number associated to it, right? So the nun in this particular system is the 22nd card, which is the Queen of Spades. And so that's why the Queen of Spades is the nun. It's 22. So N and N. And then if we go to 32, which is the Queen of Diamonds, then it's a samurai from the Kurosawa movie Ran. In my system, yours may be different. The whole point is that every single card here has an image, not because of the card, which is what some people do, but in my case, it has an image because of the number that's associated with the card. If you're wondering whether that actually holds in competition, yes, it does. James Gerwing won the 2019 Canadian Memory Championship, not only using the way that I used the cards, but also using the memory palace structure that I used. And I think both he and I were blown away that he actually won that competition. If you're ever in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, he and I do a special breakdown of how he won that competition in the course on memorizing cards. In any case, the whole idea is you can get practice at a level of abstraction by memorizing playing cards, because not only are you looking at the card, but you're looking at the card's number and its image at the same time. And then you get repetition effects, because Jack of Diamonds and Jack of Spades and Jack of Clubs and Jack of Hearts, like some of those are more similar than others. 2 are red, 2 are black, and you can sometimes get them mixed up and so forth. And it's just a really, really good practice dealing with repetition, dealing with similarities, and really working out that those images are sufficiently different. And then if you get 2 things together, Jack of Hearts and Jack of Diamonds, you don't get the 2 red mixed up, because you work on making sure those images are very, very distinct. And the number system underlying it really helps make sure they're distinct, because the consonants are very, very different from the 20s to the 40s to the 60s, etc., right? It's really cool how it all works out. In any case, you may be wondering, well, okay, so that's a very confusing and strange way to practice. It really isn't. I know it sounds like crazy, but it's so clear once that you learn it. You might be just wondering, though, like, how often do I need to practice to get an effect? Well, it's really up to you. how much you practice, how often you practice. I like to practice 3 to 4 times a week, minimum, to keep sharp. And, you got to think about your goals as well. The thing is I would suggest practicing in such a way that you're ready to use the technique at any time, unexpectedly. And when I was at the memory event, the competition that Dave Farrow had put on in Toronto years ago, 2015, I think it was, I wasn't going there to compete. I was being a memory journalist, and I just wanted to write a story about having visited a memory competition. And Dave Farrow was not really going to let me out of there without competing, without seeing my stuff. And I was well practiced enough, even though I'd never competed before, I was well practiced enough to not be embarrassed. In fact, to be incredibly proud of how I walked out of there with no competition experience whatsoever. And that's what I would suggest that you do, if only because you may be called upon at some point to memorize numbers. And since I myself don't really like memory competitions that much and will never go to one again, I don't think, I wanted to find a way to help people understand just how cool it is and how easy it is, really, to be able to pull off a stunt like that at the last moment, right? With minimum preparation with these techniques, but some ongoing practice so that you're prepared in a situation. And that's why I wrote Flyboy, this memory detective novel, the way that I did. It literally is based on what anybody could do in order to save their own lives and to save the lives of their friends and their community if they could be able to pull off a memory stunt in a pinch, like I did with Dave Farrow, except for I put it here in a situation that could actually happen to people, where you could actually need memory techniques. But if you're not fit enough to do it, well, then people suffer. And so that's what that book is about. But it's all based on reality, and part of it is influenced by my going into that situation and being able to perform with Dave Farrow. And I just basically keep myself fit enough to be able to do that if I'm in a situation where I have to. 3 to 4 times a week is basically the solution that I came up with. Your mileage may vary. The key thing to keep in mind is I know the major inside and out. I know it dead cold, right? And that's where you want to be. And then you want to build a 00 to 99 PAO from there, okay? So the next thing that we're going to talk about is applying this for when you have mixed information. You sometimes have formulas that have letters or symbols in them. And yes, you can do that too with the major. So for those of you who like to support channels like this, if Flyboy doesn't sound like something for you, which admittedly crime novels are not for everybody, you can always get this book on memorizing numbers, and it goes a little bit into what we've talked about today, but its core is really making sure you master the major. And if you want a kind of written record of this video that we've covered in our time together today, then that's a way to get that. Physical books, I think, myself, I'm a little biased towards them, but there's Kindle and there's audiobook as well. So for formulas, what you really want is 5 systems working together. You want your memory palace system. You want a number system, like we've talked about today, the major. Ideally, the major developed to a 00 to 99 PAO, but I would recommend that you do that based on the major. So spend some time just mastering the major, and then you can move on to the 00 to 99 PAO much, much faster, I would think. Then you want an alphabet system, so you have an image for every letter. And then you want a symbol system, so you have an image for every symbol you have to deal with. And then you want recall rehearsal or spaced repetition, like we talked about, so you can get all of this information into long-term memory. And you want all of that ready to go, so that when you see symbols in formulas or you see letters in formulas, you already have an image ready to go for all of those kinds of information that can show up. Or you want to have spent enough time building these systems so that when you come across a formula or you come across a symbol in a formula that you've never imagined before or had to deal with before, you can rapidly craft a new symbol, mnemonic symbol, in order to memorize that. So just an example, I just wanted to learn a non-classical logic called dialatism, and in it, it has symbols for totality, condition, and operator. And so for totality, for example, I just imagined a totem pole, and I just stuck that in a memory palace, and a condition air conditioner for condition. And, this is, in my imagination, this is one of these Ninja Turtle weapons, a rapier, I think you call it. I can't remember which Ninja Turtle used it, Donatello maybe, but that doesn't matter. The whole point is that that's what that reminds me of, an air conditioner blowing on that symbol in this particular system of formulas. That's condition. And this symbol here is totality. And, there's one for operator, etc., with a person answering the phone as an operator. And it is beautiful because very, very quickly I was able to memorize those symbols. And then I could look at the equations that the author was using in the books on dialetism, and bang presto, able to follow the plot because I remembered the symbols themselves. And then if I wanted to memorize the formulas in which the symbols are used, it's just an easy process of placing them in a memory palace. So, what do you say? Isn't the major the most amazing and majorly exciting mnemonic system you ever heard of? I think that you're going to have even more adventures if you deepen your relationship with memory in the same way that I have, because every memory palace can take a number and be even more majorly impactful as a result. So if you want to keep going, watch my video on developing a PAO system next, making sure that you start with the major, and it's going to be amazing what happens. Thanks as always for being here, for being subscribed, hitting that thumbs up, and PAO all the way, my friends, because power, not force, but power. It is so glorious what will happen when you can memorize numbers faster because you've taken the major and extended it to that 00 to 99 PAO level. Have fun making it happen.